You're good, Brian?
Yeah.
The meeting will come to order. The meeting will come to order. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Here.
Mrs. Gillis,
Here.
Mr. Melody,
Here.
Mrs. Rigby,
Here.
and Mr. Valentine.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance for this evening's meeting.
Dr. Curdy, if you would like to come forward with your team.
All right, moving on. Approval of the organization regular minutes for recommending the approval of the January 9th, 2023 organization regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Approval of the regular work session minutes. Recommended to approve the January 23rd, 2023 regular work session meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Melody, second by Mrs. Rigby. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Approval of the agenda for this evening's meeting. I have circulated to everyone, both in paper form as well as an email, separation of policies so that there are two different votes on two different sets of policies. I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the first policy or first grouping of policies, and then there are a number of there's 10 plus in the second grouping. So it's on both electronic and paper form if you got any questions. With that said, we'll do a motion to approve the agenda for this evening's meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Awards and recognitions, Dr. Marshausen.
Mrs. Venny?
Good evening. Now we're going to recognize this month's Golden Shamrock Award winners. This award, as many of you know, was founded by Mr. Ed Putnaki over 30 years ago. We're going to begin with Sells Middle School, so I'd like to invite Principal Matt Socklaben up to recognize Jen Abraham. So come on up to the podium.
Thank you, Christy. Dr. Marshausen, Mr. Kern, board members, thank you for giving us the opportunity to recognize Jen. Jen has gone through some, let's just say life. Life has really kind of hit her hard these last couple of years. And so it's, she has though turned what could have been, or was a very tragic moment in her life, and she has turned it into a platform in which she makes sure that students understand what addiction can do and how it can, get into your family and how it can, hurt the ones that you love the most. And so Jen has taken the opportunity through our health classes, through the health classes at Davis Middle School as well, to use this as a platform for her to talk about addiction through the DAP program, to talk about what it is she has gone through and how it has affected her. And to say that people have written about her, there's about 6 pages here of just great comments of why she is so deserving of all of these. Not only has she used this platform for good and to reach, at least she says in her comments of, if I reach at least one student, I've done my job. And so that is something that we're very proud of what Jen has taken on. She's also a team leader in our building. She's been that leader since I've been in the building, and I can't thank Jen enough. So, Mrs. Jen Abraham.
To say that this is an honor is an understatement. My late husband won this in 2009, so it just comes full circle for me. And we tell our kids every single day that we have to roll with the punches, and life is hard sometimes. And to just tell them that and not live it every day wouldn't do it justice. So when I lost my husband, I took that and tried to, for a very, very long time, find a silver lining, to find something positive, and it took a while. But to use that to avoid others from having to go through the tragedy that our family has gone through is worth it to me, and it's been an amazing therapy for me as well. So as long as they continue to listen, I will continue to talk. So I thank you all for the honor. I appreciate it.
For our next recipient, I'd like to welcome up Principal of Dublin Preschool, Vanessa Olinger, and Regina Stevenson. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce one of this month's Golden Shamrock Award winners, Regina Stevenson. Regina is retiring, unfortunately, after over 20 years of service in our district. She has a very unique role as an itinerant teacher, which means she supports preschool-age students in over 45 area preschool and childcare settings within our community. She supports students in their least restrictive environment and helps to keep these students around non-disabled peers as much as possible. Her relationships that she has built within the community and childcare centers and their directors has made our program so much stronger. Our community partners know that when students are working with Regina, they're in great hands and their needs are met. Regina has provided countless professional development trainings to new staff members in these settings to help them improve their teaching practices. She has worked with preschool-age students in the RTI process to help give them the early intervention they need so that we can prevent children from needing specialized services in the future. When I had the pleasure of going with her into the community, I can't tell you how many teachers, directors, and staff members praised Regina and shared how much they love working with her. She is delicate, helpful, supportive, kind, and above all, very, very funny. She is truly incredible and is a valued member of our team and will be greatly missed. She is incredibly deserving of this award. Congratulations, Regina.
Thank you very much. I can't tell you how much receiving this award means to me. Just a little while ago, I was telling a group of people a story about the fact that I was due to be born on St. Patrick's Day, and I missed it by one day, but my birthday was always full of green shamrocks and green balloons and green everything. And I remember telling my mom one time, could I have a birthday that doesn't involve like green shamrocks and stuff? And then I came to Dublin City Schools, and I've been immersed in green shamrocks for over 20 years. And now to receive the granddaddy of them all, the golden shamrock, I just, knew right away that shamrocks were meant to be a part of my life, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you all so very much. I really appreciate it. It's just been an unbelievable pleasure to be a part of Dublin City Schools, and I've met all these wonderful people along the way. Thank you so much.
We'll give a second for the room to clear here, and then Yeah, they're hidden. Yeah. All right, moving on to public participation for action items on the agenda. Nobody signed up this evening. Board President, Board of Education comments, Board of Education committees. Anything to report out?
I do. It's not one of my committees, but I just wanted to give my comments from the dyslexia community conversation, just my observations from the meeting. There were a large group of parents there who had no children left in the district. And for some, their reasons for being there were frustration from past experience. But for some, it came from a passion and a personal experience with their own children, and they are there for others' kids. And I think that's commendable. They're there to be voices of change, and they're there to be supportive, I think, as a whole. There was a large panel of teachers and administrators, I thought very thoughtfully chosen to provide clarity and transparency about early literacy changes and vision forward. They answered many questions. Without going into every detail, I saw a dedicated group who recognize the need for change, are committed to all aspects of early literacy, and are working to gather data continually so that instruction and assessment make the most sense for the individual student. And for the students who are most important, I just see this as a huge victory for the district. I know there's a long way to go, but I think recognizing that change needed to happen and then having that kind of interaction with the community, showing the changes that are in progress and what's to be done in the future, and then I think reconvening in August like we had agreed upon to show where we are and to show accountability for what's been done and talk about what we're going to do continually. So I thought it was a great evening. I don't know if you have anything else to.
No, I agree. It was what you said is well summarized of what happened that evening. And I think the important thing to note is that it's a journey. This is the first step in that journey, and that it's going to take some time to make changes and improve.
Nothing else? All
Sorry,
right.
I have one more.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So from the STAC meeting, again, so my notes, the elementary STAC meeting was largely focused on early literacy and changes, and that was all very positive. Secondary meeting, it was about pathways, and the only thing that gives me pause is there's a lot of talk about pathways, and there's a lot of talk about talking to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders about their pathways. I understand why we're doing it. I just question, is that too early? And are we making kids more anxious by talking about pathways as a 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader when they really should just be worried about being in middle school? So that's a comment that I had. And I think another thing I observed is at the high school level, counselors are continuing to stress balance. I've seen it with my own son, and I just commend that perspective. I think it's very, very important with our high school kids to stress balance, and if they hear it from a counselor in addition to teachers and parents, then it just reinforces that message. And then the last comment that I have was on behavior issues, because I was sitting in the back of the room and I could hear the teachers talking among themselves, and then it was brought up that behavior issues are increasing. They're increasing in frequency and severity, and so I guess my question is just how to walk that line between positive behavior intervention and support, and when to just be like, no, this is wrong, and we have to kind of intervene in a stronger way. And do teachers feel like they can do that? Because I just sense some frustration, like I said, from the back of the room, just that they were talking, and just wanted to bring that up. That's it.
All right.
And then I have a quick update. There was a BAC meeting last week. I'd like to thank Air Force One for hosting us at their facilities. And see Christy smiling here. It's probably in her update as well, but they hosted us last week for the meeting, and Tyler Wolf had a great discussion and presentation on student wellness, breaking down by grade level almost that the process we go through and and all the things that the students and staff and teachers are doing to ensure student wellness. So I think that would be a great presentation to, at a minimum, share the PowerPoint with the board, if not even have a board meeting in the future.
And if the board members who are going to PTO presidents on Wednesday morning and key communicators on Wednesday afternoon, Mr. Wolf will be sharing that presentation. So I think everybody might get to see it at one of those different engagement groups coming soon.
That's great.
All right, if there's no further reports or comments, we'll move on to item number 5, reports and action items from the superintendent's office.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. As we look at a couple updates, I am, and most of you have heard in some of our engagement reports and meetings over the last couple months, the strategic plan feedback is ongoing. We are now referring to the strategic plan as Journey 2030. That seems to be the leader in the clubhouse in names as we look at the duration and what we're going to be on. We're on a journey between now and 2030. We continue with engagement next week as we have more engagement opportunities with the community, and we continue to share the evolution and the development of that strategic vision. We will be sharing with you as a board the first draft within the next couple weeks as Planning Next has put together what's really coming nicely as that strategic vision that we're able to share. On March 9th, City Manager Megan O'Callahan has invited me to be part of a panel at the annual State of the Community event, which will be down in Bridge Park. And that will be a perfect timing for a preview of the work that we've done with the strategic vision with Journey 2030 in advance of bringing that to the board at the March Board of Education meeting, which is the following Monday. And we've been asked about what happened to Profile of a Learner. And I say that was a pseudo planning effort. It wasn't a full-scale strategic plan. It was what was the profile of a learner going to look like in Dublin. And Profile of a Learner from 2016 lasted about 6 or 7 years, which is how long you would think something would continue to last. And just as we know the work we're doing now is going to hopefully take us to 2030, which would mean in 2028, 29, we're probably looking at what do we do next and how do we adapt and adjust and improve. Profile of a Learner served the district well for 6, 7 years, and now it's time for what's next. So that work was done. It got us through COVID. We're now really shifting from not a single profile of a learner to how do we personalize education for each student. It's not about making every kid the same. It's not about making sure everybody has the same outcomes. When you think about the same and you think about our standards are a floor. Our standards are the safety net. But what we want is every kid to find what they are exceptional at, gifted at, and we want to be able to cultivate those skills in each and every child. So we've moved beyond this is what all of our graduates look like to saying we want every graduate to be a little bit different because we know every young person who walks in our doors comes to us with different gifts and different talents and different abilities. So just for those questions and those folks who had asked about what happened to that work just fades into what's next. And that's what we do is continue to grow and get better and improve. We've talked a little bit about affordable housing and some of the efforts by our partners in the city of Columbus to bring affordable housing to the general Columbus area. The Copperleaf Apartment Complex, which is here on the map. It's on Sawmill, just south of Summit View. It was purchased at a reduced price by the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. And then the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority has given it in a 75-year lease to a new nonprofit organization, the Columbus Housing Enterprise. And as a nonprofit organization, the Columbus Housing Enterprise is not taxable. So the 41 students who are coming to us out of the Copperleaf apartment complex, through no fault of their own, we will continue to educate and love and care for the kids who live there, but they're now not generating no tax revenue where it used to have tax revenue. And this kind of goes along with what we've talked about with the former Premier at Sawmill, which that 203 units has a 15-year, 100% abatement. We are making progress in conversations. The chair of the Columbus Housing Enterprise, Reverend John Edgar, and I had a conversation on Friday, in a very productive conversation. Today talked about it with members of the Executive Workforce Board, which we hosted here. I think there are solutions that are in the works. I'm glad that we've jumped on this early. And the conversations that we had at BAC last month, Mr. Melody, and that we've had at our board meetings have really reflected that as a community, we've got a lot of smart people who come up with different ideas, who have lots of great connections, and Dublin steps up when something is going to adversely affect our community. So we continue to talk about it. We continue to work on it. I want to be clear, this is not the city of Dublin, and this is not our partners in Union County. Our ask is communication and planning, consideration for the fact that 0 tax revenue and 41 students costs the other taxpayers in Dublin about $630,000 a year to educate the students who are there with no tax revenue. And we also know that if we let Dinky know at the food pantry, and we know let one Dublin know, and Dublin Bridges, that we can align services for students who come to us with challenges. This is an incredibly giving and caring community. And just as Mr. Andrus shared at our last board meeting, our students who are refugees, who are in our community, are making tremendous progress because it's not just the school, it's the entire community that comes together. So we really would like that communication to increase when it comes to that affordable housing conversation for Greater Columbus. We hosted today the Governor's Executive Workforce Board. Special thanks to Mrs. Venny and her team, and to our student board representatives who gave tours afterwards to the Lieutenant Governor and members of the workforce team. Mrs. O'Callahan and I gave a presentation on what partnership looks like in a school district, in a community, and a business community with a chamber, and really highlighted that the opportunity to work together and be aligned in the city of Dublin with the Dublin City Schools allows us to do great things. It was very interesting, and several members of the workforce team who serve at the state level were unaware that the city of Dublin is about 50,000 residents, but the Dublin City School District is about 90,000 residents, and that most of the suburban districts in Columbus do serve a lot of students who are outside of the municipal limits and areas of the towns that we're largely associated with. So great education opportunity. Very proud of our team, most proud of our students for coming and stepping up and giving tours to the dignitaries who are here today. And with that, Will.
I'll take over right where you left off. So we had the Lieutenant Governor here today and other business leaders, and it was a really great chance to kind of hear from these top district officials, top state officials, who work in education and work in what the future is going to look like for education, and do that for a daily living. It was especially interesting to hear, what these experts think their fields and other fields are going to look like, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And I think that one of the most interesting aspects was how prevalent they thought computer science was going to be. And you also had these, I think it was the Lieutenant Governor who mentioned how important in the field internships are, and how, especially with UC in Cincinnati, we have one of the biggest internship programs in the, I think it was, Western Hemisphere, which was very interesting to hear. But yeah, it was really great to kind of get a perspective on not only what education looks like now from these leaders, but also what it's going to look like in the future, because we have no clue what it's going to look like in the future, but apparently these people do. So another thing that was interesting was Suwaiba and I were able to give a tour to the Lieutenant Governor, and she was bullying me throughout the tour, but it was fine. It was actually very enjoyable. The Lieutenant Governor really enjoyed it. He was asking a lot of questions. He was really interested in the different programs and opportunities that students have here to not only get integrated into the workforce early, but to also kind of, learn about the different pathways starting in 10th and 11th grade. And then, what else did we do? Oh, yeah. So looking forward, what we're kind of focusing our position on and kind of spreading the word is we're going to aim to hold forums at each of the high schools, including Emerald Campus, before the end of the school year. We're just going to work in collaboration with the principals and say, hey, what's a time that we could do this? And just kind of maybe get these student councils from each of these schools and invite any students that want to come down, have a 45-minute conversation with these students about what they think concerns are across the school district and how we think that we can improve those. So looking forward to starting the conversations and planning aspects of that. And then just some fun, cool upcoming events that we have. We have winter dances at 2 of the 3 high schools. Kaufman's was this past weekend. Jerome's is on the 25th, and it's hosted by Sophomore Cabinet at Jerome. And then Sauda doesn't actually have a winter dance, but what we do have is Dublin-thon, which is a community-wide event that helps raise money for pediatric cancer patients at Nationwide Children's Hospital. And it's an incredible event. And throughout the entire year, members of Student Senate, which I did in the first 3 years of high school, we go out and we form relationships with the businesses across the Dublin community, not only to help raise money for the Nationwide Children's Hospital, but to also create those partnerships. You get your logo on the back of our t-shirt and you get to donate pizzas, and it's just a really incredible opportunity to not only make those connections but just kind of bolster the event. And it's always fun. You guys should definitely come. You're going to get an invitation and you're going to be expected to attend, and you can't sit down. You're dancing for like 5 hours straight. It's great. And then also we have spring sports starting up. And I think that honestly, kind of going off of what Ms. Rigby said earlier about the importance of balance, I think it's a real testament to our group and the voices that we represent that every single one of us is a varsity sport athlete, and that most of us are participate in spring sports. So I know that we're all really looking forward to the start of that. And then last thing is we are also having Spirit Weeks, which we are all very much so looking forward to. We have the You Are Loved Spirit Week at Jerome, with the red, white, and pink out, which was like for Valentine's Day. We have the Spirit Week for Dublin-thon at Scioto with the famous Adam Sandler Day. Don't ask me what that is. I have no clue. And then National Honor Society and Art Club are making roses at Kaufman to help raise money for spinal muscular atrophy, which is a really great cause. So just some stuff that we're up to, not too much, but yeah. Any questions?
No questions. Your reports are always full of energy. Love hearing them.
We have a number of community conversations coming up. In February, we are going to have our community conversation, and this is Mrs. Venny's idea. We're having a community coca, and we're going to have hot chocolate and go over the strategic plan and get feedback from people who aren't part of all of the other key communicator groups that we have. So anyone who is not in PTO Presidents, Key Communicators, BAC, they will have an opportunity to come and preview the strategic plan, provide feedback. We'll have stations set up where they can talk with folks about different sections of the plan. So that will be the focus in February. In March, we'll be at the Dublin Chamber of Commerce in the morning. And then in April, as we've publicized, we'll have 2 community conversations again, one at the Chamber, and then we will have a safety evening here at Emerald Campus, where we'll be able to talk about our safety plans, both what we've done this year and the work that we're planning to do in the future. As Mrs. Rigby mentioned, we've had good turnouts at our focused community conversations, and I think it's an opportunity for us to, when there are topics that there is great specific interest for us to bring the experts together. So it's not, and those of you who know me, I can talk for a while, but it's better when you're hearing from the experts and the people who do that work on a daily basis. And we have such a phenomenal team. When we talk about safety, Mr. Collier and I will be teeing that up, but we'll have other folks there as well. I have 2 recommendations on the board agenda for this evening. One are the policy recommendations that are up for the second reading and vote. These policies were up for a first reading at the first meeting in January. And there were questions raised by a community member at that meeting about some of the policies. And like we should do, we had the opportunity to reflect as a board, to go back and have specific conversations about the concerns that were raised. We took an extra meeting cycle to have another meeting of the policy committee. And although everyone is not in agreement, this is how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work so our elected officials are able to share their thoughts, share their opinions, and ultimately cast a vote for the work that we're doing. So I am proud of the conversations that we've had as a leadership team, of the engagement that our administrative team has had under the direction of Dr. Schwanke when we came back together. And I understand that we're not unanimous, and that's okay. Our community is diverse. Our community has a lot of different thoughts and opinions, and that's why we elect board members. So those recommendations will be up for consideration at the end of my report. Also up for consideration at the end of my report, the recommendation of a 3-year contract with the Dublin Education Association. Can say without hesitation that we have the best teachers in Ohio, the best teachers in the country. So proud to work with this team of educators, and proud of the work that we've done with Mrs. O'Connor, Mrs. Guerin, and DEA to bring this contract together in such a collaborative, positive way, and to make that recommendation to the Board of Education this evening.
All right, we'll start with item B. It's recommended by the superintendent and the treasurer that the Board of Education approve the attached negotiated agreement with the Dublin Educators Association effective August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2026. And Mr. Kern, I saw you raise your finger for clarification.
2 years financial, 3 years on wording. So,
is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Questions or comments? I'd just like to say, and I know Scott's been through this several times when we told the other board members, the process to get this done, and I don't know where Donna went. Is she hiding in the back? The process to get this done typically is not this smooth. It's not this collaborative. On behalf of the board, extremely appreciative of the work our administrative team has done, as well as leadership from DEA. I think this speaks volumes to, especially coming out of COVID and everything that we dealt with, the strong unification that we have between our administration, our board, and our teachers. Any additional comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. DeSilla,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Approval of new and revised policies. We're going to do C. How do you want to break this out as far as?
I would go with your top ones, but let's read the numbers if
Okay,
you don't mind,
yes.
of which ones you're voting on.
So the first item, actually, we'll separate these and then we'll have a discussion amongst the 5 of us.
Yes.
So to be clear, policies 2430, 2431, 5111, 5336, 5460.01, 6700, 8210, 8320, and 8330 will be voted on as a set. So that is set 1. And then set 2 will be policies 1617, 2280, 2413, and then there's deletion of volunteers 2430.02, 2430.02, 3120.08, 3120.09, 3217, 4217, 5335, 7217, 7440, and 8600. All right. So before we move on any of these items, we'll go ahead and have board discussion at this time. I specifically asked for these to be separated this evening, so I think it's probably appropriate that I speak first. I prepared some comments to try and help guide my thoughts and my discussions. I think in my 19 plus years doing this, I don't know that I've voted against approving any sort of policy, and I plan on doing that this evening, and because of that, I feel like I need to share my thoughts. So this is hopefully not too long-winded, but it has context, and I think it's important for members of the public to both understand the process that occurs when we approve and amend policy, as well as some of the communication that has occurred as we've evaluated some of these changes. So I'm on policy committee. I was not able to attend the first policy committee with fellow committee member, Mrs. De Silva, and then I wasn't able to attend the second one due to family reasons, and Diana went in my place. Originally, I supported these changes and recommendations with the basis of it being legal. Just to be clear, I will never go against district policy. I will never do something as a member of this board that violates the law. We have strong, non-discriminatory language in our district policy that aligns with federal law to protect all students and staff members. But as I've looked further into these changes, I've got more questions than answers with some of these policies. I respect the work and the views of the committee, Mrs. De Silva, who's been passionate and has put in a lot of time, Mrs. Dr. Schwanke, who has done a great deal of work, as well as a handful of administrators from a number of different levels here in the school district. For the public's sake, I think it's important that we break down how that policy is updated or changed for the district. So boards in Ohio mostly have use two different resources when it comes to policy recommendations. One is Neola, and the other is OSBA, the Ohio School Boards Association, who, for the record, is not recommending some of these stylistic changes that are being considered this evening. Nonetheless, in 2009, our board decided to switch from to Neola as our policy consultant. Typically, these policy consultants provide regular updates based on changes in the law that are continually happening, and it's quite a lot to put on our administrators to stay on top of. The district has an administrative policy committee, as I noted. It's 2 board members. Our legal counsel also sits on it, and a handful of administrators. They provide a recommendation, and we have at least 2 readings at our board meetings before we vote. Then it's one of our main duties as a board to discuss, as we're doing this evening, vote, and ultimately set the policy of the district. Policy 0171 states the board will evaluate how policies have been implemented and their general effectiveness. In the case of these proposed stylistic changes this evening, I still have not heard how our policy in its current form is ineffective or illegal. We have now been giving multiple reasons for these proposed changes. First, it was legal, which we now know wasn't the case. Second, it was then the simplicity of the reading, which is debatable and still hasn't been used as a reason by the Neola representatives. And then third, the reason became shifting to gender-neutral language. In my opinion, one thing's clear. The stylistic changes weren't due to changes in the law or simplicity of reading. They were due to the request of some Neola clients who are political bodies asking for change, and I'm going to get to that in a second. We are paying Neola to help make recommendations, and they won't provide an actual, straightforward explanation for these changes. On Wednesday, January 25th, at the request of the board, a representative from the school district asked our Neola rep the following question. Many policies in this update have similar changes with pronouns being removed. We had a first reading of policies on a board agenda and had public comments concerns regarding this issue. A few board members are questioning why these changes have been made. The Neola rep then responded, the pronoun changes are our attorneys updating Neola policies to make them more gender neutral. As future updates roll out, the references to gender neutrality will continue. With that said, if your board is opposed to making the pronoun changes, the board can choose to leave the pronouns as is. Our Dublin representative then responded, I understand we can choose not to accept Neola's changes. However, I have been asked to inquire if the Neola attorneys are now taking a political stance when guiding us in updates for policy and guideline. Thoughts? The Neola rep responded, here's a response to your question about pronouns and policy from my boss. We have been asked by clients to purge the pronoun issue and updates moving forward. There's no political issue there, just responding to client demands. It is always an option for the client to accept or reject suggestions offered by Neola in updates and templates. We will process and post whatever clients adopt. So because of the varying answers that we received on these changes, I contacted the Neola rep to understand the why behind the proposed changes. And I asked two questions. One, has Neola proactively communicated the reason for these changes to the district? Typically, Neola sends the district a quote-unquote Neola explanation sheet for policy changes. So this is standard. They provide a sheet that literally is called Neola explanation sheet. It explains why they're proposing the different changes. I continue to say this has not been addressed in any communication from Neola, and the answer from the rep was no. So this means that the committee recommendation came without an explanation for change from our policy consultant because the first time that Neola was asked about the why behind the change was on January 25th. And that doesn't take away from the view or reasons from anybody who serves on the committee as to why they feel. But from my perspective, we didn't have the why until January 25th. We were filling in the why. And then number two, I asked why Neola didn't include a reference to female pronouns in Policy 6700, which includes language about nursing mothers. She stated there were no references to gender or pronouns in Policy 6700, except in the title, which references nursing mothers. If your board wants to change employees to she, her, or the mother in Policy 6700, that is entirely up to the board. I followed up by asking, is the change in style due to an effort to be gender neutral in approach or due to simplifying the reading of the policy? And at that point, she literally only replied, these changes came per request of clients. She would not give a straightforward answer. That was the end of her response. And so I've taken time to reflect, and I've had conversations with fellow board members, administrators, and personally, I believe that the board should change policy when we identify an issue requiring a long-term solution. And I think the key to that sentence is a long-term solution. Our solutions shouldn't blow with political winds. I support the substantive changes that we have tonight across the board in these policies, but I don't support the stylistic changes to some that could easily change based on the composition of this board and the 5 members. If these changes are adopted, we will have some policies with pronoun changes and some without. For instance, one of the policies this evening, Policy 3120.09, it includes he, she language. We need to better understand our why before making full-scale policy changes, and when that change occurs, in my opinion, it should be applied consistently across the board. So those are my comments. I tried to have communication with everyone ahead of this evening's meeting. I know that there's strong thoughts amongst many, and I hope to help facilitate a healthy discussion. So who would like to talk next?
Oh, my mic was on the whole time. I didn't know that. Yeah, I have some comments on this. You know, when this was first brought up, I honestly didn't know what the concern was. Like, it wasn't something that jumped out at me. In fact, having sat on the policy committee for a year now, I looked back at some of the policies that we passed before, and they are consistent with this language. And I went and I looked at the city of Dublin's policies, and they use a similar style. In graduate school, we use APA style, which is the American Psychological Association style, and it's very similar to this too. For the reason that when you use a lot of he, she, it makes it more wordy, it makes it choppy. Just one of our committee members actually pointed out in the policy committee that when you're reading long text of policies, sometimes it's hard to remember who a pronoun is referring back to. So having it say specifically the student, the parent, actually makes it easier to read and easier to comprehend. Also, when I received the pullouts, I went back and I looked at some of these policies that are under the original style on this paper. And if you actually read through the policies, the style is actually consistent with the other policies, except for the one that you mentioned, which is 3120.09. There actually are no pronouns in there. So they're all consistent. In my mind, none of these are different. Like the categories that we've separated them into actually are not different. So I'm still a little confused. And actually one of these, I just quickly before the meeting made some notes once I saw this list. So 3120.09 was updated to add a missing statement. So I don't know if, they caught that one he, she that was in there because that wasn't the purpose of updating the policy. And then policy 51111 that is listed under the new style, it actually changes the pronouns to their because it is a plural noun. So that actually makes more sense than if you're saying students, it doesn't make sense to say his or her. So it was a plural students, so they changed that to their. So I think if you read through not just the red deletions, but if you read the policies as a whole, I think it actually makes sense and it actually is more legible. And like I said, just easier to comprehend. And I think, I do find this a little bit of nitpicking a little bit because I think when we speak, if you don't know the gender of someone, it is natural to say there. Like someone left their phone. I don't say someone left his or her phone. I think sometimes I'm not saying you specifically, but I just mean people in general, are picking out things and maybe they did stand out more because they are in red, and they're highlighted. But I don't think these policies are inconsistent with what has already been happening, and I don't see an issue.
Thanks. Go ahead.
I had a question. Mrs. Silva, you had mentioned that you went back and looked at all policies approved since we've been sitting on this board the last year. Are you saying that we change pronouns?
Yeah, I'm saying that we've used this style before, since February of last year.
Okay.
And I would add to that, through our conversations, it hasn't been at this scale and it hasn't necessarily been with policies such as 6700, which respectively there's differing viewpoints on.
Absolutely, and I appreciate, Mr. Valentine, the great lengths that you have gone to get an answer for, how do I want to say this? It's something that we didn't feel like we requested and definitely has been pointed out and felt like a long investigation, so I appreciate you taking the time. I have read over these numerous times. I have had numerous conversations with most of you over the last few weeks. I think for myself, I respect everyone sitting here tonight, and especially our administrators and people that have put time on the policy committee. And so I think I keep going back to, I never looked at this personally as a political move. I always looked at this as a stylistic choice. I think it also has a lot to do with even how our building emails go out. We say students versus he and she for a lot of things that we do in our district. That being said, I really thought it was very helpful when we heard from administrators and that these stylistic changes do currently represent certain students in our district by seeing the word they, them, their, student, faculty. For me personally, not taking a political stance on that, hearing that, I think my goal sitting here is to just always make sure that we have a district that is welcoming to everyone at all times. And for me, I feel passionate on a yes vote for this because if a single word such as student versus he, she makes that person who read that policy feel more comfortable being in our district, I think we should be embracing that. But I do absolutely understand where everyone has come from in terms of not understanding where this came in the pipeline. I think that change is a hard thing. I think as our world evolves, we start to become desensitized or even more heated in certain areas. But for myself, I'm looking at this as something that already supports our non-discrimination and access to equal education opportunity policy. It's just a further backing. That also being said, consistency is huge. And I don't know the amount of time is that best use of our time to go through every single policy. I don't know the resources that would take and the money overall, but I do think that's something that is a direction that we should be heading in. I just don't know what that looks like. And I'm not sure that anyone sitting around these tables is going to be able to give a concise answer on that tonight. And that is, I will stop talking now.
Thank you for sharing. Mr. Melody, Mrs. Rigby?
I too, I agree with Mrs. Gillis. I, respectfully reviewed these policies for, not just for language, but for the overall feel of what this is doing. And when we realized that it wasn't a legal basis for these decisions to be made, then it just becomes, well, as the gentleman who spoke at the meeting, why are we doing this? And why are we doing this now? And when you kind of take a 30,000-foot look at the policies and you see all of the he, she language is gone, and it's replaced in some policies with the word there. And I know we've kind of dissected this, and maybe it's getting old, but when they're referring to a singular individual, that's where when you say students or you're talking about a plural subject, the word there makes sense. But when you're talking about a singular individual, whether it's a student or an employee, and you use the word there, that seems like an intentional and very strange language choice to me, talking about one person. And when we look to, are these policy changes, are they making it more concise? Are they making it more readable, I guess? I don't see that at all. I don't see it being any more precise. In fact, there's one policy 5111 where, it's just a continual reference to the adult resident and then possessive, the adult residents, and then same thing with the superintendent over and over and the student over and over. Instead of just naturally submitting or substituting he, she language there, within the same sentence, you know exactly who that pronoun is referring to. So I don't think it's confusing. I don't think it makes the policy language any more clear or more concise. We've talked a little bit about policy 6700, which stands out to me as being very strange because when you talk about nursing mothers and you're looking, that policy references nursing mothers in the subheading, but then within the body, it talks about an employee, a staff member. It's the employee's responsibility, and it references there. It just seems like a big sidestep to not say she or her. And, again, I find it strange. And I don't find these changes to be helpful. He, she language has been in our policies for a very long time. For the sake of consistency, I think we should stick with he, she language in policy. It's not, it's meant to be inclusive of every individual within our school, so I look at it that way. And, and I just think that when we as a committee, or we as a board, when we talk about policy, those policies, if we're going to make changes, we should know why we're making them. And they should be changes that are consistent. And they should be changes that advance the education of the district and really try to steer clear of what could be conceived by not all, but by many, as being political, in this case being, an infusion of gender ideology, and it's not something that is consistent with the community. So I think that we would do better to avoid language like that.
So, listening to everyone's comments tonight, I can see what everyone thinks on some of the policy changes. I personally think, as they are presented, they are very clear, they are very readable, and they make sense. I do understand there is some concern with changing some of the policies, removing the he, she. But I think when we read through them, if you replace that with employee or principal or whatever that person is, they read very well and they're very understandable. So I support them as presented.
All right. As everybody's had an opportunity to kind of share their thoughts and where they stand, I think one of the outstanding issues unrelated to the policies themselves, well, unrelated to the substance of the policies themselves, is if this evening they're voted and the changes occur in all 20 plus of these, what then potentially happens on the administrative side or the board side for future policies? Is this going to be something that we continue to have potentially this discussion on each and every one? What are options, Dr. Marshausen, that we would need to consider?
If the policies are approved, and not speculating how you will all vote, but if the policies are approved with some being unanimously passed and some not, I think as an administration, the board's authority rests within policies. And we are going to need some direction from you moving forward as a board in terms of what are your expectations when policies come before the committee. Because to have this conversation 3-4 times a year seems like if there's a direction from the board, whatever that direction is, our goal is to bring you policies that you approve. Because I think I've said this before in public meeting, the 2 statutory responsibilities of the board are to hire me and Mr. Kern and to adopt policies by which we govern the district. So this is an area where your power is absolute and your direction to me, and in this case with Dr. Schwanke heading the policy committee, what I would ask for, Mr. Valentine, is direction from the board moving forward so that we know and we have that kind of guidance on where you would like us to go as a governing body.
Mrs. Gillis, I think that...
Is that direction in terms of a vote? Is that, how do you want to see that direction?
I think once the votes are cast tonight, I will ask a question of the 5 of you, and it doesn't need to be a vote. But I think I know how things are going to go, but I think I'd rather have this conversation after you all vote, and then I'll ask where you want me to go next.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And Mr. Valentine, just to be clear, there are a lot of things I'm really passionate about in running your school district, and as the superintendent, I have expertise in areas, and our team has expertise in areas. This is something that, as it's been pointed out, this is a preference that the 5 of you have to let us know what you want. Yep. Because with all of these policies, the implementation of the policy doesn't change regardless of this part of the language. When we as a team carry out your policies, whether it is a pronoun or a noun, it's going to be the same when we're implementing your policies in this case.
Absolutely. Is there a motion to approve? I'm going to call it C1, the first group of policies that I read previously.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Any additional questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
No, but I just want to be clear that it is not on the substance that I'm voting no, it's on the language.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
No, and just like Mrs. Rigby, fully support the substance. And again, appreciate all the work of Dr. Schwanke, Mrs. De Silva, members of our committee, but I'll respectively voting no based on the style of the changes. Motion passes 3-2. Item 5C2, and this is the policy set of, I believe, 13 policies under consideration. Is there a motion to approve? I will move it.
Second.
Oh, we got everybody in on that one.
Everyone.
All right, we'll go with Mrs. Gillis. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Dr. Marshall.
So my question for the five of you is, unless something were to change, the policy committee, which has Mr. Valentine and Mrs. De Silva on it, the policy committee would, without objection, bring the style that passed in all of the policies to this board for consideration, as long as the makeup of this board is this board, unless I hear something different from you as a board. Because for us to do this every time, probably, if this is the style that the board wants to move forward with, it would be a waste of everyone's time to bring multiple policies forward if the intent of those policies is the same when looking at the style. Is that fair, Mr. Valentine?
Yeah, I think the only question that I had, based off a conversation we had with legal counsel as well, is these changes, and I guess it's all relative to the perspective, but these changes and the wording, I believe, are not, the stylistic changes are not substantive within, I think that's the way Ohio Revised Code
Yes.
may put it. And underneath that scenario, there would be the ability for those changes to occur within policy underneath your authority with the blessing of the board without it necessarily becoming a vote each time. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding that?
Stylistic changes can be done with either one board reading, or they can be changes that could take place with a general support of the board. So if we're talking about a technical change to a policy, those technical changes could be done with your blessing. And if, for example, the board would have to give me authority to say, Dr. Marshausen, we direct you and Dr. Schwanke to go through and remove all he, she, his, her from all of the board policies. If you passed a resolution to give us that authority, we could go through and make all of those changes, but I can't do that without you granting me the authority to do that. So technical changes can either happen in one vote without a second, or in the authority for us to come up. For example, there have been several policies recently that we changed names due to changes in employees or shifting around when we added Mrs. Althouse to our HR department, and Mrs. Althouse becomes one of the potential Title IX compliance people. That's just one reading, and we pass that in one reading. But I would need the authority to go through and make changes to the policies.
Okay. And I bring that up just to make sure all 5 of us obviously know that information as one element of the consideration.
And I know Mrs. Gillis raised the question about, is this something consistent in our manual? It would be a really heavy lift, I think, to go through and do them all at once. And considering that I think everyone agrees that it does not impact the enforcement or enactment of the policies, absent a compelling reason to do so, I would not be in favor of taking the time to just go through the whole manual to try to make this, make the changes across the board. If that's something that the board wanted to do, that could be a resolution at an upcoming meeting.
Okay. Well, I don't think that we need clear direction to you this evening on that. I think obviously it's something that we need to come to some sort of consensus as a board, whatever the majority may be, and provide Dr. Marshausen that direction. But for the time being, I would think at minimum, based on the way that the voting went tonight, that those policies would come to us in similar form as to what the majority approved this evening.
Yes.
And just to point out, that's just the way that Neola sent them to us. So basically, you know, I just want to point out, like, it's not like we went in and changed language. We just, on our own, this is what was recommended to us from Neola.
That is correct.
But I just want to be clear, too, Chris, that you had said that OSBA has not made these changes. Is that correct?
Correct. They're not recommending these changes to districts. All right. We good on that? All right. Moving on. Treasurer's office.
Each of you, except for Mrs. Gillis, she already got her preview of her copy there, is our annual financial report that is on your table. It's some light reading of about 150 pages. But yes, really, this actually is a very valuable document. It's part of what we get audited on every year, which, by the way, we got a clean audit again for this year, so we're proud of everybody. It takes everybody within the district, not just my office, but every department, as we implement internal controls and processes and policies throughout the district with that. So we're appreciative of that. It does still have the old logo because we had submitted stuff already before that, but next year, Mrs. Venny will have it changed, okay? So there is some really good information on that. It is used, typically one of the biggest things we use it for as we go to issue debt and different other things in our rating agencies, which, by the way, we were AAA rated by S&P the last time, which is the highest rating. They do use it, go through this information and review it and use it when they give us our rating. So it is a very valuable piece of information. Also, something new, and I've already discussed it with 2 of you and 1 of you tomorrow. On the next agenda, you will in February 27th, you will see something different that you have not seen before. It will be resolutions with House Bill 126. And this will have, you'll actually see be 1 vote for about 35, 36 resolutions when it comes to our property tax and sales and or reductions that we have an attorney who reviews that stuff. And so I've gone over, like I said, 2 of you with that, 1 tomorrow, and the other 2 I will talk to you about it a little bit and kind of give you the history on that, for that information to go so you're well prepared to see something new there on February 27th. On this evening's agenda, we do have our financial report. We are online with projections. We are just a tad bit over in revenues, which is a good thing, about 1% and about a 0.5% under in expenditures. So doing good at this point of the year. I did get word that Franklin County is actually going to be settling a little later on March 29th, so when it comes to property taxes. So as I've talked many times, that's our 80% of our funding, especially for our operating fund and general fund. So we have our projections. But everything is get started as we roll into the 5-year forecast update in May. But also budget season will be upon us very soon here as we go through that process. And actually kind of from an HR and personnel perspective, that's kind of wrapped up from that standpoint. And those estimates are put in our forecast. But as we go forward with some of what I call the non-payroll expenditures and working with the other departments. So fun stuff. But good.
Yeah.
It is a collaborative process, I will say that. I think, Mr. Stark, how many times have you changed with your thing there and go over can you create this account code? Can you create that account code? And yes, you do account code, but that's okay. So that's on this evening is our financial report and kind of what's going forward with that. As our budget and process and 5-year forecast. And we also have some donations as we usually do. And that's it for this evening.
All right. It's recommended by the Treasurer that the Board of Education approve items 6B, approval of the January 31st, 2023 fiscal report, and item 6C, approval of donations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Rigby. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Reports from the Department of Academics and Student Learning.
Okay, I'll start us off this evening just by giving a quick overview of February 17th, Professional Development Day. This is a day where the morning is spent in professional learning for our teachers and our staff. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Samantha Aldhouse, who is, in addition to her role as Director of Building Leadership for Elementary, she also is leading our professional development. And she has created a PD guidebook, which really is a fabulous guide. I'm looking at Brian. Samantha works in his department. It's a really heavy lift for her to figure out how to provide, develop, and implement professional development for all the 2,300 people that we have. And shout out to Lori Marple's team and Chris Andres' team who make sure that the right experts are providing that learning. So every employee will be somewhere on the morning of Friday the 17th. Some dyslexia training related to the Ohio Dyslexia Guidebook. We also have math implementation work going on. We have for our gifted and our EL teachers and our classified staff some really pointed focused learning for them as well. And then the afternoon for all of our staff will be spent for a work day. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Andres for an update on gifted identification.
Thank you, Dr. Schwanke. As you guys know, one of our core values is always growing. And our board policy lists 4 areas of eligibility for gifted identification, and those 4 are superior cognitive ability, specific academic ability, creative thinking ability, and visual and performing arts. And the one area for always growing that we're taking a look at is that visual and performing arts area. Starting this spring, we're going to work with our visual and performing arts teachers and our gifted intervention specialists on a new and improved model. We know in our district we have amazing, talented kids in drawing and painting, sculpting, music, dance, and drama all across the district, and yet we only have a handful of kids that are identified. So next fall, we'll start gathering nominations from parents and from teachers. From there, we'll use screening measures, and I'll tell you too, I don't know exactly what we're going to use yet, but the Renzulli scales for rating the behavioral characteristics of students or an assessment called the GATES, the Gifted and Talented Evaluation Scales. Students who get specific scores will then be invited to go to the Educational Service Center of Central Ohio in the spring of '24 to do a performance or take a portfolio. And then gifted IDs will be sent out to those kids by the end of the school year next year. So you might say, Chris, why? The first reason is because we have a board policy that says we need to be doing this better. The second reason is, you know, like all kids who have gifted identifications in some areas, it helps our staff, our gifted intervention specialists, our visual and performing arts teachers, better understand the unique needs of individual kids in our district. And that's going to lead to more targeted instruction and maximizing individual students' potential.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to give you a brief update tonight on where we are with all of the curriculum work that we are in the midst of in my department right now. So in phase 1 of the curriculum review cycle, we are in review with our performing arts teachers. That includes band, choir, theater, and orchestra, and general music in the elementary space. Our teachers have come together for Workday in December, and then secondary joined me in January, and they looked at the updated standards in their area. They are thinking about what that looks like in their classrooms and really digging deep to put together a graded course of study that will come to you for approval this spring. That work will wrap up this Friday in some of their professional development time. They'll have some additional conversations, shoring up some of the final details there. In phase 2, we have business, family consumer science, STEM, high school technology courses, and English language arts. Those first, if you take English language arts out of that first group, they have been having continued conversations about implementation of their graded course of study. This Friday, some of those groups will be looking at a deeper dive into some of the credentialing that we can layer within, which guides additional learning with our pathways. And for English language arts, at K-5, there's a focus on word study, decodables, and classroom libraries. Remember, phase 2 is that resource exploration. And so at secondary, the focus is around classroom libraries, writing, and personalization. Today, from 4 to 6, Shannon Hunt-Stokey was available after school, and our elementary teachers had an opportunity to come by and look at some of the resources that are under consideration for the elementary space. This Friday, February 17th, our secondary teachers will continue their exploration, and the community is invited to look at final choices under consideration for review in that ELA resource area from 5 to 7, March 1st, here in the Union. And that is being advertised through Christie's team and also through Friday newsletters that the principals send out. Are there any questions? Thank you.
All right, reports from the Department of Operations.
Good evening. We have only one item for your approval tonight, and that is we're excited to start the journey on new Elementary 15. This is at the 13.5 acres that we have at the old Riviera Country Club. It's directly adjacent to Jerome High School. So for this Riviera Elementary School, we would like to, the first step is to get a designer on board. Last month, we put out a request for qualifications. And we're happy to recommend to the board tonight to begin contract negotiations with a team of architects. And this is Ford & Associates and Perkins & Will. These are two different independent companies. We've used them both independent of one another. Very good success with Ford. You know, Ford was the one who designed this building for us. He's also acted as owner's rep on a lot of our projects, has a very good relationship with City of Dublin and knows their expectations. And Perkins & Will is the designer who not only did the Upper Arlington High School, but they most recently did our Jerome addition and the multi-use facilities over at Scioto and Kaufman. So they are teaming up on this project that we're very excited about. And if this resolution tonight just begins contract negotiations, and that'll be with me and Mr. Kern. And our expectations is to have that contract to you pending this resolution approval at the next board meeting. Any questions?
All right, it's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve the attached resolution authorizing the district to begin contract negotiations with Ford and Associates, Perkins and Will for professional design services for the construction of our next elementary school. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Reports from Human Resources.
Good evening, members of the board. We have an administrative hire on tonight's agenda. So Jenna Pruden, who is in the back right now, Jenna, if you could wave to everybody, will be joining us in Dublin from Marysville City Schools, where she is currently a special ed coordinator. She's replacing the position of the Bridges PAS coordinator that's currently held by Mark Etherton. He's retiring. She will transition with us over the coming months and will officially start on August 1st. So welcome, Jenna. Glad to have you. You'll see 2 retirements on tonight's agenda. Actually one. The second one is a correction. Jen Keating. It's only a date correction. The board had previously approved that one. And then Carl Reed will retire from Kaufman High School with 37 years of service in Dublin City Schools. So we wish him the very best. There are 7 resignations on the agenda, with most of them being from teachers who were on a leave of absence last year. There's 6 new hires on tonight's agenda, along with the home instruction tutor. And then the supplemental contracts that are on tonight, they mostly cover spring athletics. And you'll also see a few salary changes and a resignation in this area. The same is true of the pupil activity supervisor contracts, mostly covering spring sports. And then moving on to the classified agenda, you'll see 6 resignations and 1 retirement. The retirement is for Pete Beal. He'll be retiring from Scioto High School as a security monitor at the end of the school year. He's been with us for 18 years. And then you'll see 6 new hires and 3 unpaid leave of absences. And that concludes the HR portion tonight.
Any questions or comments? All right. It's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education, approve items 12A and 12B. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Office of Public Information.
So our core value of Better Together includes communicating and celebrating, and I have several things to share tonight. First, I'd wanted to highlight that on Saturday, February 4th, we had 6 Jerome Orchestra students perform at Carnegie Hall in New York, and they're on this slide here. Next up, you've probably heard there was a lot of news around Dublin Kaufman alumni Abby Steiner, who broke yet another record, the 300-meter sprint at the Millrose Games, and that's the 3rd fastest indoor 300-meter in history. I wanted to share a heads up that our district is working on getting a mural to celebrate her accomplishments that just keep coming. That will be sponsored by Puma on the side of Kaufman's stadium at the grandstand. So we're targeting this spring for unveiling that. Last week, a reporter from Channel 6 visited Scioto High School to record a segment for She Serves, which spotlights women who have served our country. You can look for a powerful interview by one of our EL teachers, Claudia Priest, in a feature which is going to air on ABC6 this Friday evening. On this same slide, I wanted to share that this Thursday, February 15th, is National School Resource Officer Appreciation Week. And, you know, we're very fortunate to have a close, positive relationship with the City of Dublin and the Dublin Police Department. And these officers who serve in our schools build relationships with students and staff and are such an integral part of our learning community and keeping our buildings safe. So be sure to celebrate them. And finally, this last slide, Dr. Marshausen mentioned our community cocoa that's going to be happening on Wednesday, February 22nd, 6:30 to 8 here in the Union. And he didn't mention there's going to be a scavenger hunt. So for the little ones, it is for families, staff, community members, anyone who wants to come and learn more about that plan and give input. And there will be a hot chocolate bar. So we invite you all. And the last thing I wanted to share was we have a new event that we're piloting called Bright Futures. And this is a special event to match graduating seniors and recent alums with promising career paths. This will be of interest to students who want to jump right into a career path with advancement opportunities, maybe looking for something with tuition reimbursement and benefits, and a way to develop their skills with a trusted local company. We have over 16 local employers participating. That's going to include a career fair, and then Goodwill is going to be helping with coaching, and we have some members of our BAC in our community to help with students to prepare them for the last part of the event, which are interviews. Companies that will be hiring include, just to name a few, Ohio Health, Honda, AT&T, Performance Auto, OSU Wexner Med Center, Ease Logistics. I could go on. There's 16. We have roughly 25 spots still remaining to fill. So if you know anyone that's interested, please spread the word about this free event. The first part begins on February 24th. Thank you.
All right, items for board discussion or future agenda items. We will move on to item 15, executive session. In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the Dublin Board of Education will go into executive session to consider preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Gillis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Melody. There will be no action coming out of executive session. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. We will move into executive session. Thank you.